Welcome, everyone. How did you know? All of a sudden, it was 7:30 and everybody got quiet. That was impressive. Yeah, I was just looking around for a bell or something, but unnecessary. Welcome. And I am Mirabai Bush, and one of the founders of this program, of the Center for Contemplative Mind, and this academic program, along with Arthur Zajonc and others. And so I welcome you, although you've been here for a few days and I just came. I am welcoming you, and with thanks to Great Smith College for allowing us to be in this space, which we have done for a number of years now. And you know how when you meet in the same place over and over, it begins to, it feels different each year, you know. It's wonderful to be here. And I just, some of us had dinner together, and hearing some of the stories of how people are deepening their own contemplative practices and bringing them in and just really innovative ways into their teaching. I just feel so moved by it and grateful to you all. It's such a hard time in the country and the world right now that, you know, we need awakened leaders for the future. And that's who's sitting in your classes right now. And through bringing this kind of teaching to them, you know, you are cultivating young leaders with resilience and loving kindness and compassion and a commitment to the truth. It's not only a nice thing to do anymore, it's really critical. So I just want to thank you all. And it's a time where, you know, we're not alone in feeling the need and also responding to it with some kind of contemplative response. About 2 months ago, a few women friends who've been bringing practices into various institutions, not all higher education, just came over for lunch, and we started talking, and we said, well, let's see if we could bring together some other women, and we'll just have a meditation together and like support each other in doing this work. And we then invited a few more women, and we all put it out to our networks. It's tomorrow. 3,000 women have signed up. That would not have happened even a year ago, I'm sure. You know, I'm stunned. So, of course, it's easy. It's a 10-minute meditation. It's not like going to a monastery, but still, it really does show both that people are honoring the importance of the contemplative, and also, I think, they're recognizing that it's a really hard time and that we need all the resources we can call on. So tonight we have the great Len Hayman giving a talk, which I won't say anything about now because you will be dazzled by it, I'm sure. And we're doing this in honor of Arthur Zajonc, who is the most important person in establishing the field of contemplative education, of understanding that these practices can help us teach and learn and know in a wholly different way that is a perfect complement for critical thinking and the scientific path. And Arthur, as you probably all know, has written a lot about it, but he really was the one who brought together a core group of people in the beginning who allowed this to flourish, who also, in the beginning, when it was, we started in '96, no one had thought of doing this. And we were able to get the American Council of Learned Societies to partner with us. I mean, how did that happen? I mean, it was definitely a marginal idea at the time, but they did, and then we gathered, for 10 years, we gathered fellows in many different kinds of schools and disciplines. But it was really Arthur who, as an eminent and respected scientist in an important school, stood for how these practices could help us teach in every kind of discipline and could help students learn in a different way and deepen. So Carrie has made a very beautiful short video of Arthur to share with you, because in the first years, everyone who came knew Arthur personally. You know, that's how the circles expanded. But now it's been, you know, we know there are so many people engaged in this work that not everybody does know Arthur so well. So we made a little video so you can know as much about him almost as we do. And so, Carrie. Like monster school.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, what I'd like to do this evening is to really speak to the theme of the future of higher education, but to do so in a prescriptive way, but more in a larger way, which really addresses the question of but what is this enterprise that we're actually doing? What is it all about?
We welcome you to the Arthur Zajonc Lecture on Contemplative Education. This annual lecture honors Arthur's groundbreaking work in physics and the humanities, his commitment to teaching, and his vision of colleges and universities as places where meaning and purpose are tightly interwoven with intellect and action, where compassion and care are infused with insight and knowledge.
Knowledge is not an object that you acquire. It's not a mechanism that somehow you provide to the human mind. It's actually an epiphanal moment. If science is, as I'm saying, born out of these epiphanies, then I think the reflective and contemplative has a lot to offer, not only cultivation of attention, but even as a mode of inquiry, even as a way of knowing, which is, after all, the central project that universities and colleges are engaged in.
For the last 40 years, Arthur Zajonc has worked at the intersection of modern physics, humanities, and contemplative traditions. As Emeritus Professor of Physics at Amherst College and Scientific Coordinator and past President of the Mind and Life Institute, he has built a body of work that includes research on the foundations of quantum physics, the relationship between science and the humanities, and the practice of contemplative education and inquiry.
How is it we guide our lives and conduct our lives? Where do we find our next step? And especially for students who are forming their lives, the contemplative as a means of inner guidance, that you really begin to weigh and sort out your values gently and reflectively, can be of huge help. If we are committed to knowledge, then we want to be committed also to exploring the world with these lenses, with this method in mind and heart. If we're going to have a perspective which is whole, then we need to bring all of our capacities to the issues that we confront, spiritual capacities as well as more conventional sensory-based intellects and the like.
At CMind, the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, Arthur served as the founding director of the academic program and later as executive director. His accomplishments in these roles include initiating the annual summer sessions on contemplative teaching and learning, founding the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education and its annual conferences, and leading retreats for educators.
And so what's the pedagogy? And what's the pedagogy for the end of suffering? This is like, okay, we're going to do the end of suffering. But I think you have to actually reach out that direction. You have to reach somehow that far. It's all right. As long as it's not filled with pride and hubris, it has some modesty about it. Even if we just take a little step in that direction. I think that when we take up the practice of contemplative pedagogy, the work that we're doing here, we're not just doing a little add-on. It seems to me that when we introduce this modality, we're trying to address that deep-set ignorance. So this is a revolution in higher education, I hope, that takes us into the future, and to be in the presence of it when I'm here with you all is a special grace and privilege. Thank you very much. Life is dense, but we need to calm ourselves, get clear, get quiet, direct attention, sustain the attention, open up to what is normally invisible. And certain things begin to show themselves, maybe gently to begin with, but nonetheless, it deepens and enriches our lives. No matter how deeply we engage the world, no matter how far we manage to penetrate into the mystery, there will always be more mystery. It's always deeper, it's always bigger, but it's always an invitation. The mystery is a kind of invitation in. Find the door.
Thank you, Arthur, for everything. And thank you, Carrie. It's beautiful. And so now we have the great privilege and luxury of having Len Hayman speak for us, not for us, to us, but for us also. And his bio is, or the description of his life is in your programs, but I'm going to read you now anyhow, because we want to kind of warm up the space for him. As a teacher, Lenwood Hayman works to inspire social justice-minded scholars to ask questions to enhance their focus on the health issues situated in the communities from which they come. His research focuses on addressing the social, psychological, structural, and environmental influences of emotional arousal in underprivileged and marginalized populations. From his time spent training as an undergraduate research fellow with the National Institutes of Mental Health at Morgan State, to his training as a social health psychologist at Wayne State, stress reduction has consistently been at the center of his scholarship platform. As a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Michigan, which is also where Arthur got all three of his degrees, Lenwood's research focused on the influence of stress on the eating behaviors of low-income mothers and their preschool-aged children. After a few years on the tenure track, Lenwood shifted his focus to the influence of stress on academic achievement in first-generation and non-traditional college students. Recently, Len has been working to help African American men living in urban spaces to engage in conversations about mental health, particularly any symptoms of depression and/or anxiety resulting from community-based stressors such as the ongoing Flint water disaster. Being born and raised in Talbot County on the eastern shore of Maryland, Len became interested in social justice activism as a teenager and focused his time not spent on his studies and lettering in varsity sports as a voice for upward mobility and positive growth for marginalized people. Although Len has been primarily restricted to helping amplify the voices of the marginalized through his scholarship, he uses his training in mindfulness and contemplative practices to create safe spaces for engaging in meaningful dialogue between the well-resourced and the under-resourced. It's a good phrase. Both inside the classroom and out in the community. From August 2014 to May of this year, Len was an assistant professor of health behavior and health education in the Department of Public Health and Health Sciences at University of Michigan, Flint. Last month, Len embarked with his family upon a new adventure into familiar surroundings by returning to Maryland to assume his new position as Associate Professor of Public Health in the School of Community Health and Policy at his alma mater, Morgan State University. Len, thank you so much for coming and doing this.
Check, check. Good evening. Good evening. Can everybody hear me all right? Fantastic. I did the obligatory mic check. So I want to begin, of course, by thanking Mirabai and the selection committee for inviting me to give this lecture tonight. Thank you to Dr. Zajonc, author, for the body of work that you have put forth in laying the pavement, allowing us to maybe not easily follow behind you, but still laying a pathway to make it a bit easier. I have to thank my family, my wife, Alexandra, for joining me on this trip this weekend, or this week. I have to thank my mother and father for taking care of our sons, Mateo and Lucas, while we're here. And I have to thank all of you for honoring me, honoring all of us with your presence here this evening. I'm very excited to be able to spend this time with you all. So one thing that I have to get out of the way is I have no intention whatsoever to lecture you. It's not going to happen. One thing is I am not a lecturer. Any of the students that have taken a class with me, even those who've taken statistics with me, perhaps especially those who've taken statistics with me, they would tell you that I have no interest whatsoever in lecturing. My sons most likely would hear this and say, "Come on, Dad. You just got finished lecturing us before we left to go spend the weekend with Gammy and Papa. You lecture us all the time." Now, obviously their voices aren't that deep. They're only 8 and 6. But in my role and privilege as their dad, I got to lecture them at least a little tiny bit. But again, I have no intention on doing that. When I say that I'm not a lecturer, I reflect back on something one of my mentors, Dr. Cleopatra Caldwell, once said to me as a postdoc. I was looking for a faculty position, and she asked me, "Have you gone through all of this training to become lecturer, Lenwood Hayman? Or have you been preparing to become professor, Lenwood Hayman?" Now, as Professor Hayman, I see that the narrative associated with being a professor, particularly in this black male body, is not something that fits for me. It isn't engaging enough for me. There's a finality in the title of professor that suggests that I should be held in high regard because of my title. Because of the narrative associated with this title, I need to be able to skillfully profess to all who will listen that my knowledge on a specific topic is vast and that my expertise on this topic is great. I found this particular narrative to be incredibly boring and, quite honestly, masturbatory, as it is exclusionary, if not, it's exclusionary and certainly not inclusive. It's closed-minded, it's self-serving, and it is one-sided. Now, both of the scholars in the two previous AZ lectures, Paul Wapner and Vita Goler, used this quote by Howard Thurman in their talks. And if you haven't watched their talks, I really encourage you to do so. So I will intentionally shift the trend into a pattern now and repeat it again tonight. Howard Thurman said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and then go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Whew. Having learned the significance of coming together, I now see myself as being more of a facilitator, a trainer, encouraging beings to come together in community. This is what makes me come alive. Asking questions, learning, loving, quite literally gives me life. I ask questions. I provide a lens through which to obtain answers to said questions, and I wish you well on your journey to obtaining your answers. But because of my community building focus, I implore you either to work with me in obtaining answers to the questions or to reconvene so that we can discuss what we've learned while we were apart from each other. Community. In other words, I invite you to be a colleague, not a pupil, so that we can learn together. So again, this is not a lecture. My intention is to ask you what I see as critical questions. My intention is to challenge each of you to seek out the answers and then to report back and share with the group. I'll tell you now that it's going to get a little bit uncomfortable if it hasn't already. The questions I have and the challenges I will pose are intended to stretch, engage, and hold, but it is possible that some of you will feel more secure in shrinking, disengaging, and letting go. I get it. So let this serve right now as the trigger warning. And if you need to take care of yourself at any point, I implore you to do just that. This is not me giving you quote unquote permission to take care of yourself. It is me asking, suggesting, inviting you to benefit the community in taking care of yourself this evening. Now, before I get into it, I want to take us through a practice intended to invoke collegiality and community. So, if you will be so kind, I invite you all to settle into your seat. Free your hands, free your minds as much as you can. Invitation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a series of phrases. My invitation is to have you all repeat said phrases to yourself in your mind. All right? Again, this is an invitation. So as we take in a deep cleansing breath, just to help us settle even deeper. Again, repeating to yourself the following phrases. May I recognize that I am here, present, and occupying this space. May I recognize that I am healed and healthy enough to be here, occupying this space. May I recognize that I am whole and complete in occupying this space. May I recognize that I am worthy, I am at home, and I am safe here occupying this space. May you recognize that you are here, present, and occupying this space. May you recognize that you are healed and healthy enough to be here, occupying this space. May you recognize that you are whole and complete in occupying this space. May you recognize that you are worthy, you are at home, and you are safe right here in occupying this space. May we recognize that we are here, present, and sharing this space. May we recognize that we are healed and healthy enough to be here sharing this space. May we recognize that we are whole and complete as we share this space. May we recognize that we are worthy, we are at home, and we are safe right here with each other, sharing this space. And as we sit and hold those affirmations, I invite you again to take a deep cleansing breath. And come back to meet us in this space. In March, I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. It was not necessarily surprising. I had been feeling it, something, in my body for quite some time. So when I finally had the courage enough to break the narrative and go and see a therapist and sit with him and share with him and learn from him and with him, it was invigorating, it was liberating. But it was just the beginning of the journey. At March of this year, 2019. New journey all over again, even before we started to move. Now, we knew that the move was going to take place about a year in advance. There were several things that happened. So it was beneficial And it was also incredibly stressful because there was this long, drawn-out period of the move is coming, the move is coming, the move is coming, the move is coming, get ready. And so naturally, with all of the requirements of being a husband, a partner, a father, a brother, a friend, a loved one, a professor, adding that onto the new expectations, it was a lot. Holy cow, it was a lot. And again, so when I learned what was going on, when I had an idea, when I had a sense of what was going on, it was spot on. I mean, really the most pressing challenge came with determining which of the myriad narratives about me, or beings that look like me, which of those narratives I was leaning toward, and how this lean served me, or obviously how it did not serve me. My practice helped me to learn to pay close attention to my position, how I occupy space, and how I interact with beings with whom I share the space. With my practice, or what my practice has helped me to realize is narratives, or rather our ability to tell narratives, is one of, if not the most significant aspects to our humanity. We are uniquely privileged, more so than any being on the planet, to craft stories and then to share them, to communicate them, right? So what does this mean? Well, according to Blue Cross and Blue Shield, their National Health Index, the quality of life based on health outcomes for everyone in the United States is about 91.2%. This means that on average, we, the residents of the United States, are living 8.8% beneath our optimal health. The quality of health, the quality of our health, is almost 9% less than what it could, and for all intents and purposes, should be. In other words, we as a body, on average, are suffering. Breaking news. And this is just here in this is not just here in the United States, right? Let alone what's happening worldwide. These stats, I should say, are from the United States, are based on the United States. Now, I know that 8.8% may not sound like much, but how many of you, by show of hands, and folks at home, wherever you're watching this, please feel free to raise your hands as well. How many of you would be grateful to weigh 8.8% less than you currently weigh? Look, right? Or how many of you, again, by a show of hands, will be grateful to be 8.8% taller? Inches taller? What? How many of you, here it is, watch this. How many of you, some of y'all ain't raising your hands, I'm paying attention, I'm watching, but I bet you all of y'all about to raise your hands. How many of you would like to receive an 8.8% raise in your salary? Hello, right? So this becomes especially interesting when we consider that there are 10 health conditions, this 8.8%, 10 health conditions accounting for this 8.8% reduction in quality of life, with the top 3 being hypertension, major depression, and high cholesterol, as you can see. All right? And although there are some genetic predispositions that increase the risk of certain populations suffering from these conditions, extensive research supports that social determinants of health are the major contributing factors. Social determinants of health. The World Health Organization's Commission on the Social Determinants of Health has defined them as the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. The primary vehicle that drives the influence of the social determinants of health is stress. Again, surprise, surprise, right? In other words, the stress associated with the conditions in which we are born, grow, live, work, and age are the fundamental drivers of this less than optimal quality of life, based on where we are born, where we grow up, where we live, and where we work, the labels we are given and those we select for ourselves are weaponized against us to negatively impact our health. This happens disproportionately more frequently amongst those of us marginalized because of our labels. Well, let me not go there yet. Plainly, some of us experience a disproportionately worse quality of life, primarily because of the incomplete narratives associated with our labels. Now, the point of me showing you this slide, I show it the first day of class when I teach social determinants of health. The point of this slide is to illustrate some of, this is not an or the exhaustive list. I exhausted myself coming up with this list. And some of the students that take classes with me contributed as well. As well as 2 years ago when I led the workshop, I incorporated this slide and some kind folk, Brother Marlon being one of them, pointed out, hey man, you forgot one, add this. I was like, all right, cool, I'm gonna put that in there. These are some of the ways that we are marginalized, right? Our answers, how we answer each of these categories influences our health outcomes. Are you serious? Yeah, I'm serious. I talk to myself, right? How we answer categories is making us sick. Social determinants of health. We are force-fed these incomplete narratives even before we're born via hormones transmitted to us from our mother, which allege that certain beings and spaces are inferior and subject to our conquering rather than compassionately contemplated and cared for. What might the world look like if we chose an open first, compassionately curious lean in to new sources of information rather than a closed-minded capitalistic curiosity where we lean on our focal beings until they are crushed under the weight of our fixation to categorize and then dismiss them? What would it look like? Violence, according to the World Health Organization, is the intentional, and I put intentional in quotes and I'll explain what I mean in a minute, the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another being, or against a group or community, which either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. And I put intention in air quotes because intention, and actual quotes here. Because intention, it's okay to laugh, it's all right, has historically been regarded as the primary determinant in terms of qualifying an action or speech as violent. Intention, right? But who is asked about intention? The oppressor. Certainly not the victim. Because when we ask the victim, when we take a trauma-informed lens, when we ask the victim if what happened was psychologically harmful, painful, encourages maldevelopment, deprives us from access to X, Y, and or Z, if we ask the victim, the traumatized, they will most certainly say, I don't know what the cat's intention was, but sure felt like violence to me. Sure felt like violence to me. One of my favorite scenes from one of my favorite movies, Coming to America. You know I had to do it. My wife just, oh God. Eddie Murphy playing the role of Clarence the Barber in My T. Sharp Barbershop elucidates the moment when he haphazardly was introduced to Martin Luther King Jr. And what he says is, I was walking down the street, minding my own business. I go around the corner. Next thing I know, I run into somebody. They punch me in the face, knock me down on the floor. I look up and I say, Dr. King, you hit me in the face. Dr. King said, oh, thought you were somebody else. And he walks off. the gentleman, the other characters that Eddie Murphy was playing in the movie, swore down, no, you did not meet Martin Luther King. And he goes, yes, I did. No, you did not. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. Right? It's a fantastic scene. One of my favorite movies, all-time favorite movies. But the reason that I mention it is because to Clarence, Martin Luther King Jr., regardless of his intention, committed violence against him. The perception was Martin Luther King Jr. was this incredibly peaceful, passive guy. And so the absurdity of him punching him to the ground, right, encouraged the other folks that were in the barbershop. One of them, a very young Cuba Gooding Jr., right? I don't know if y'all knew that, but very, very young Cuba Gooding Jr. encouraged the people in the barbershop to call bullcrap. I'm doing my best not to cuss. I don't curse, I cuss. I'm from the country, so I don't curse, I cuss. It was very difficult for them to believe this narrative because it was in direct contradiction to the narrative that had already been established on a national level about this particular individual, right? So again, there was no care, there was no regard for poor Clarence getting knocked out on the street. He was just minding his business, right? But anyway, in considering the frequency and ferocity of the incomplete narratives we are fed, it may be helpful for me to call them what we've called them historically, stereotypes. Stereotypes in and of themselves are harmful, right? Stereotypes in and of themselves are harmful. But the violence comes when we rely on those stereotypes as we interact with the beings with whom we share space. Now, stereotypes are true. What? I know this brother did not just say in front of all these people the stereotypes. Stereotypes are true. Stereotypes are not completely true. Stereotypes are partial truths. Stereotypes are incomplete narratives. Stereotypes are incomplete narratives, and these incomplete narratives are increasingly dangerous, particularly because of how easily violence is dispersed in today's day and age. I'll use the word mediated to further contextualize it in 2019. Incomplete narratives are particularly dangerous and harmful when such violence is mediated. Put differently, when violence is broadcast across multiple networks into our smartphones, our televisions, our watches, or any other connected device, it immediately becomes a threat to public health, as evidence suggests how damaging the perpetuation of violent narratives are to certain populations. Social disorganization theory was developed in studies of urban crime by sociologists Clifford Shaw and Henry McKay. What this theory alleges is that social disorganization takes place when there is a breakdown of collective norms, as well as a breakdown in how these collective norms are communicated. When I say collective norms, I mean narratives that assist the collective, that assist the community. The collective norms and the processes, the means by which these norms are communicated. Social disorganization is the wall that comes between the communities, cutting them off from the resources that they need. Partially based on, I'll say partially, almost totally based on incomplete narratives. Subsequent studies have found that crime and deviance are not randomly distributed. They are not randomly distributed. but are linked to populations, may you be well, holding incomplete narratives, which historically wall them off from receiving the support that they need. I just said that. This past Sunday, on August 4th, 2019, on MSNBC's Deadline, White House, Professor Eddie Glaude of Princeton University brilliantly pointed out how the United States has come to embody social disorganization theory. And rather than me attempting to paraphrase what he said, it's only 3 minutes, I'm gonna play it for you.
You know, America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them. And the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about us. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, yo, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this, and I'll take the hit on that. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America confronting, white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, a 2-year-old had his bones broken by 2 parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out.
Are we uncomfortable yet? Now again, I want to reiterate the importance of you taking care of yourself because I am about to go a bit deeper. So come along at your own risk. As Professor Glaude points out, violence is a consistent part of United States history. The narrative of violence has always been told and perpetuated, and it's just that now we are seeing it more and more often. The violence is now mediated. And this mediated violence is contributing, not simply causing, but contributing to the social disorganization we are experiencing. And it is contributing to the 8.8% reduction in our collective quality of life. In our collective collective quality of life. As a country, not as black people or brown people or white people, but as a country, as a collective. And to further illustrate my point of just how mediated violence is, I've prepared a brief video to demonstrate how what I see as violence, as it has been captured over the last 4 or 5 years or so. Now, the challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to sit with these images in all of their violent splendor and to practice paying close attention not only to how you feel as you view these images, but also pay attention to where you feel it and to make note of it. If you need to take something out so that you can make note of it, I invite you to do so. Pay attention to what you are feeling and where on your person you feel it. Does it manifest in a specific region of your body and then shift to other areas? Or does it stay put? This is a challenge, but again, it's an invitation. So take care of yourself. All right? As I look at these violent images, And as I am keenly aware of what I am feeling and where on my body I am feeling it, I am reminded of how important it is for me, personally, to have a practice in which I can engage so that I can ground myself. I recall mentioning to a loved one back in November, over at the High Horse in Amherst, that it is of the utmost importance for me to remain connected to music. I mentioned that it is of the utmost importance for me if I am to continue in this line of work, of living, of simply existing in this body, in these spaces, I must keep a song on my heart. And so back in the spring, when I first got the email from Mirabai asking me to do this tonight, and as I was trying to figure out how, amidst the transition and shifts and difficulties and challenges I knew would be starting to show up around this time, one of the songs on my heart at the time started playing in my subconscious. And although I did not yet know all of the words, I knew the refrain, and that was enough to convince me to say yes to doing this. As I look at these images, those words of Steve Winwood, Will Jennings, Eric Clapton, and Shaka Khan come to mind, and I cannot help but consider the existence of a higher love. Specifically, they ask us to think about it. There must be a higher love down in our hearts or somewhere in the stars above. Without it, life is wasted time. Look inside your heart, I've looked inside mine. Things look so bad everywhere. In this whole world, what is fair? We walk blind and we try to see, falling behind in what could be. Bring me a higher love. Bring me a higher love. Oh, bring me a higher love. Where's that higher love? I keep thinking of worlds are turning and we're just hanging on, facing our fears and standing out there alone, a yearning. And it's clear to me there must be someone who's feeling for me. Things look so bad everywhere. In this whole world, what is fair? We walk blind and we try to see, falling behind in what could be. Bring me a higher love. Bring me a higher love. Oh, bring me a higher love. What's that higher love I keep thinking of? I will wait for it. We're not too late for it. Until then, I'll sing my song to cheer the night along. I can light the night up with my soul on fire. I can make the sunshine from pure desire. Let me feel the love come over me. Let me feel how strong it can be. Oh, bring me a higher love. I said, bring me a higher love. Whoa, bring me a higher love. Where's that higher love that I'm thinking of? Where's that higher love that I'm singing of? This is that higher love I keep thinking of. The challenge in coming up with an operationalization of higher love. That was the challenge. How do I operationalize it? Operational definition. What's a useful definition? How can we use it? How can we not just talk about it in these lofty and loving and escaping terms? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Where do I go to find it? As I sat with these questions, again, amidst all the shifts and uprooting that's been present in my life for the last year, the answer came to me. This higher love looks like me in the smiles and jubilation on the faces of my loved ones. This higher love sounds like laughter and joy. This higher love feels like safety and acceptance. And to find this love, I go home. And as I mentioned in the practice when we first began tonight, home is not necessarily a place, or at least a singular place, right? Home is where you feel safe enough to make it. That's home. For 1 week at the end of each of the last 4 summers now, Northampton has been home for me. And it's not because of all of the signage letting me know that some of the people around here believe that my life matters. But because of the loved ones I've met while I'm here. In other words, I feel safe enough to call this place home because this is one of the spaces in which my beloved community convenes. And so when I speak of radical love in my title, this is the type of love to which I am referring. Beloved community. In public health research, we refer to it as community cohesiveness or social cohesion. What is radical about beloved community? Well, when I speak of, in consulting the definition, I should say, of radical, we see that radical means root, a basic principle, a foundational aspect. In regards to change or action, radical relates. It relates to or affects the fundamental nature of something. It is far-reaching or thorough. So when I speak of radical love, I am speaking of root love, foundational love, the love that has the power to change the fundamental nature of society. While holding this belief in the power of love, again, that it has the power to change the fundamental nature of society, I created a formula to demonstrate my particular operational definition of beloved community. And so when I speak of beloved community, I am referring to the ratio of multidimensional love, which is the product of love of self, love of all beings, and love of shared space environment. The ratio of this multidimensional love and temporal consistency, which is the product of change in time. This is what it looks like. Bless you, may you be well. Love of self multiplied by love of all beings multiplied by the love of shared space and environment, divided by the product of temporal consistency. What is the only thing in life that is consistent? Change. Temporal consistency equals beloved community. How can you be in beloved community if you don't first love yourself well enough to know that you have a community, or to know that you deserve to be in community where people actually love you and you let them and they let you love them? How? So this love of self, I propose, is the most critical aspect to this formula, the singular most critical aspect to this formula, because as difficult and complicated as this formula is to live, right, to exist, to dwell in beloved community with other people in spaces that you share with other people, not even only with other people, but with other beings with whom you share space, right? Thank you. With whom you share space over time as change occurs, it's not as simple as I have it depicted here. But yet it is. This is the lens. How we wear it is as follows. If we consider love to be the practice of understanding, if, not telling you to, but just go with me for a little bit. If we consider love as the practice of understanding the focal being, the focal object, whatever it is that we're paying attention to, if we consider love as the process of seeking understanding, of practicing understanding, then it is crucial for each movement we make to be focused on the outcome of understanding our focal being. The first aspect of loving as a practice of seeking understanding is visual. The behavior is seeing. And because our intention is to understand, we see with the intention to observe the focal being. In efforts to understand, we lean in, being mindful not to lean on, as leaning on could create unintended pressure on the focal being. When we see something that interests us, that piques our curiosity, what do? When we see a flower that is particularly beautiful, we lean in. When we see words that are particularly interesting to us, those of us of a particular age put on glasses, and then we lean in. Depending on our level of compassionate curiosity, in other words, paying attention to both our personal responses as well as the responses of the focal being, we progress to the second aspect, which is to hear. Again, because our intention is to understand, we hear with the intention to listen to the focal being. In efforts to develop a deeper understanding, we lean in further. Seeing is not enough. Observing is not enough. We lean in to be able to listen, to hear. Once again, being mindful, being careful not to lean on. Leaning in and not leaning on so as to not increase the pressure felt by the focal being. We lean in, not on. Lastly, again, depending on our level of compassionate curiosity, we progress to the third and most difficult aspect of loving or practicing understanding, which is the tactile aspect, in which we touch with the intention to feel the focal being. In efforts to develop an even deeper understanding, we lean in further, maintaining an even larger awareness of the importance of leaning no farther into the focal being as the focal being is leaning into us. What? We lean in so that we can observe better and so that we can hear better and so that we can eventually feel, right? But we don't lean in any farther than the focal being is leaning into us, thus creating interdependence. Interdependence, where I am no more or less dependent on you and your welfare than you are on me. Interdependence. And the crowd goes wild. Oh, this is such a blessing. Woo. We can only progress through these three aspects via compassionate curiosity. Compassionate curiosity. Not just curiosity like, oh, wow, your hair looks so nice. Can I touch it? No. Compassionate curiosity. You can just say that, wow, your hair is so beautiful and just leave it at that. Just, if they say you want to touch it, hey, there you go. Otherwise, that isn't leaning in, that's leaning on. It's called a microaggression. I don't have time to go over that right now. Now, as we reflect back on beloved community, at the core of community are the individuals that dwell therein. Love of self, love of all beings, love of shared space. Which is why I began the first practice by inviting us to first focus on the self. The self carries great importance in consideration of the beloved community, as it is the self, once again, that determines participation, depth, and duration. In other words, we can only participate in beloved community if we first and foremost love ourselves. Whew. Translating this back again into public health speak, specifically social psychological speak, if we operationally define love as social support, if we don't perceive that we have it, if we don't believe that we have it, then we do not receive the health benefits of someone who does perceive that they are socially supported. In other words, what you perceive is your reality. Some of us have been bombarded with narratives so long that it encourages us to believe that we are not worthy to receive support or love. For so long that we don't know how to exist in beloved community. We don't see a seat for ourselves. To counteract this destructive narrative, I developed a brief practice that I would like to take us through. This practice is based in large part on the Just Like Me exercise, developed by Mirabai, and it can be found in her book with Daniel Barbazat entitled Contemplative Practices in Higher Education. I'm almost positive that Mirabai has a copy in her purse. Or there are copies outside. But anyway, whereas Mirabai's activity is designed to help practitioners make connections with the individuals with whom they sometimes share space, my take is intended to help practitioners connect to the being with whom they always share space, their self. So, in recognition of the time, I'm taking my time, I'm inviting you to engage in this practice. So, once again, position yourself as you need to. If you have a cell phone or some sort of device that has a front-facing camera on it, I invite you to take that out now and open up the selfie function. If you do not have a device, I don't know who you might be. If you do not have said device, or if you don't feel comfortable, with the image that you will see when you look at your device, I invite you to avert your gaze, to close your eyes, do what you need to do, and wrap your arms around yourself. If you can do both, God bless you. My yoga teacher's back there. She's like, yeah, I can do it. Look, watch. She just showed me. I can't do it for too long because this is the slim cut. This is not the athletic cut that has the Lycra in it. So I feel the seam of my jacket asking, come on, dog. But as you hold the focal being, I invite you to repeat to yourselves in your mind the following phrases. The being I am holding has a body and a mind. The being I am holding has feelings, emotions, and thoughts. The being I am holding has, in their life, experienced physical and emotional pain and suffering. The being I am holding has at some point been sad, disappointed, angry, and or hurt. The being I am holding has felt unworthy or inadequate. The being I am holding worries and is frightened sometimes. The being I am holding has longed for friendship and connection. The being I am holding is learning about life. The being I am holding wants to be caring and kind to others. The being I am holding is curious about and intrigued by the life they have been given. The being I am holding wishes to be free from pain and suffering. The being I am holding wishes to be safe and healthy. The being I am holding wishes to be happy. The being I am holding wishes to be loved. Now I invite you to take a deep, cleansing breath. As you invite feelings of compassion, wellness, joy, gratitude, and safety to arise right here, right now. And I invite you to will these feelings of well-being up from the earth, or to accept them as they pour down from the skies. or to tune into the vibration of these feelings as they are omnipresent in this room. And as you acknowledge the presence of these feelings of well-being, I invite you to open yourselves to these feelings. And to facilitate this opening, I invite you to repeat in your mind the following phrases. I wish for the being I am holding to have the strength, the resources, and the social support to navigate the difficulties of their life with ease. I wish for the being I am holding to be free from pain and suffering. I wish for the being I am holding to be peaceful and happy. I wish for the being I am holding to be loved. I wish these things for the being I am holding because this being is alive, and this being is in this space, and this being is in this present moment, and because this is what this being needs. Now I invite you to conclude this practice by repeating in your mind the following phrase. I am grateful for the time I was able to spend holding my focal being. And once again, I invite you to take a deep cleansing breath as you transition back into this space. Don't let yourself go, though. Keep holding yourself in some way, shape, or form. Don't let yourself go. Oh, that's what this was called. This is what that was called, I should say. Forgot to progress the slide. But anyway, in summation, the public health significance of radical love, or the public health significance of the radical love of beloved community, is that according to a large body of evidence, quite expertly summarized in a recently published paper by Jingwang Zhang and Damon Santola in the Annual Review of Sociology, just came out, 2019, it has the power to promote positive health outcomes for the residents that dwell therein. Beloved community. Decades of evidence. Historically, however, I believe Martin Luther King Jr. said it best when he mentions, the end of the civil rights movement is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opposers into friends. It is this type of understanding goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the heart of all beings. Clean back in 1956. Later, Dr. King expounds deeper upon the type of love he means. And he says, in speaking of love, we are not referring to some sentimental emotion. It would be nonsense to urge people to love their oppressors in an affectionate sense. Nonsense, pish posh. Instead, there are 3 words for love in the Greek New Testament. First, there's eros. In Platonic philosophy, eros meant the yearning of the soul for the realm of the divine. It has come now to mean a sort of romantic love. Second, there is philia, and it meant intimate affectionateness towards friends. When we speak of loving those who oppose us, we refer neither to eros or philia. We speak of a love which is expressed in the Greek word agape. Agape means nothing sentimental or affectionate. It means understanding, redeeming goodwill for everyone, an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. I hear you. Thank you. I promise I didn't push a button to make that happen. That was awesome. In other words, love at its very best is provided. Love at its very best is provided as an offering. Not when it is provided as an investment. In other words, not with the expectation that it will be returned at some point in time when needed in an even grander gesture than it was initially given. Not an investment, an offering. When we are able to love so securely that we can sit down at the feet of the focal being and care not what happens to it afterwards, that we can sit the love at the feet of our focal being, just sit it there and not care what happens to it afterwards. We can just offer it. That is the higher love that I am dreaming of. Thank you for your time and attention. You all honor and humble me. I'm grateful, and may you all be well. Thank you. Now, I love questions. I know it's 9 o'clock. I don't know what the time is like. I had another practice that I wanted to invite us all to engage in. But it's something that we can walk out to, so to say. So if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have whatever an offering you may have, I'll be grateful to entertain it at this time. Yes, ma'am.
Test. Oh, gotcha. Thank you so much for your great, inspiring, powerful lecture with singing. Really appreciate. I have a question. Would you please clarify what do you mean by compassion? Oh, I teach Buddhism, and actually compassion in Buddhism has a different meaning. I noticed that compassion in this contemplative pedagogy has different connotations. So I would like to know, because one of your slides talking about seeing something with compassion, and it's very different from, to put it simply, to alleviate suffering of all sentient beings. That's the very brief definition from my Buddhist studies. But I don't think that's what you mean. So would you please clarify what do you mean by compassion? Thank you.
And what's your name?
Gloria.
Gloria? Right on. One of my favorite songs. When I speak of compassion, I do refer back to the etymology of compassion, right? The Latin translation of compassion is to suffer together, right? So in considering compassionate curiosity, the intention is that when we have a curiosity about a focal being, it is to keep in mind that the questions or the curiosity that we might have could contribute to the suffering of the being to whom we are paying attention. So if we acknowledge the possibility, if we acknowledge the likelihood, not even the possibility, but the likelihood that this being is suffering, depending on what I look like, I might look like the traumatizer. I might look like the source or one of the sources of this individual's suffering, right? So when I am doing my leaning, when I say compassionate curiosity, I simply mean be careful and be mindful when you lean so as to not create additional pressure. If you ask a question, if you have curiosities, guess what? The person about whom you have curiosities might not care anything about your curiosities because it might just be too painful to have your curiosities coming from you simply because of what you look like or because of what you represent or because of how they perceive you. It's incredibly complicated and complex, right? But when we talk about trauma-informed work, my colleagues and I out in Flint, we use resilient-informed work. So rather than talking about trauma-informed, which is focused on what happened to you, right? We use a resilience-focused work, and we say, how did you survive? See the difference? When we talk about compassionate curiosity, it's simply an acknowledgement that I'm aware that you are suffering. I have curiosity. I have questions. I am curious. I am interested in understanding you and what you are experiencing deeper. Would you allow me to do so? Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Hi. I was just wanting to ask, as a follow-up, do you possibly mean empathy? Because it's a practice of empathy and curiosity put together rather than sympathy. Because a lot of people feel sympathy, but they don't realize there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. So is this just a practice of empathy? Is that what you're trying to explain?
It's a contributing factor, sure.
Okay. And a second question that I was actually going to ask more personally, but if you're not coming in as a teacher, if you're not coming in, like for myself, I'm coming with a mastering in global health, and I'm a new student or newly graduate, and I'm trying to figure out how to get started. And what you're talking about is actually what I've studied. And I'm trying to figure out, like, for instance, how would you get started in the public? How would you get started with what you're talking, not just self-love, but also when you're wanting to get into the community? What would you advise in starting, besides if you're, I'm not a teacher, so I can't speak for everyone else, but everyone has that opportunity to reach out to your students, and that's great. If you're a teacher, sorry. But yeah, so what would you advise?
Right on. Thank you for your questions. And what's your name?
Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine. The first step that I would advise is positioning yourself in a place where you can observe first. If you are interested in helping in some way, shape, or form a focal community, show up. Go to said community and make your presence known. Be safe, but make your presence known. Depending on your program or depending on your connections in your area, I would strongly recommend attending, finding out when there are block club meetings, finding out if there are community organizing boards in that particular area. If it's an urban space, really, pretty much any space in the United States that is anywhere near to some sort of research-affiliated college or university or institution, there's going to be some sort of relationship that they have, right? There's going to be some sort of relationship that they have. So I would advise you perhaps to start there or to start there in addition, right? The point is, when we do community-based participatory research, when we go out into the community, the intention is to not go out into the community as Dr. Hayman or as Professor Hayman. They call me that because I'm with African Americans and they see it as an honorary term, so they won't allow me to just be Wood. They're like, what? You Dr. Hayman, you Professor Hayman, right? But if I show up enough, and I didn't get the privilege to do that in Flint, I don't feel like I had the privilege to show up enough. But if you show up enough, then eventually they might feel so comfortable to say, hey man, how you doing, right? You're not coming representing the university or the institution at that point in time. That's when the real work begins. Because then they trust you enough to be open with you. They trust you enough to be honest with you. They trust you enough to believe that you will not corrupt whatever it is they lend you. Not whatever it is that you take away, but whatever it is that they lend you. They trust you. The importance is in positioning yourself in a way that will increase the trust that your focal community has with you. You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good day.
So Abegunde, two things that are on my mind and what it is that you shared. One, it recalled to me 3 years ago, I spent 3 weeks in Juba in South Sudan, and it was one of the first times that being there that I really had to acknowledge what the possibilities for the U.S. were if we did not work out what we are working out, and still working through that particular kind of trauma. And it was really deeply moving, but I understood at a whole different level from both a local, national, and global perspective. And then the other thing is, I want to thank you for your choice of images. So you said, to prepare yourself. And so I was preparing myself, right? But you did something I think which is really very difficult and very remarkable, is that even in your selection of the images, that you selected those with compassion. You selected them to show the range, but even in the suffering, there is compassion there. And it's a really very difficult thing, I think, to show the images that you did and not, to select them in a way that you're still showing the love that is possible. And so I want to thank you for that very much.
See what family do? She was able to pick up on that. I didn't even tell her. That's a byproduct of family. Thank you, sis. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Ala, and I just wanted to thank you for making the note in your presentation about not needing to be affectionately loving towards our oppressors. I just feel like, so I organized to get people out of ICE detention, and right before I came here, I was giving a speech to a bunch of older Jewish folks. I'm ethnically Jewish as well, and I am explicitly pro-Palestine, and a lot of them were Zionist, and I said, if you don't support colonial genocide, you have to not support it internationally and globally. You can't just say, I want to help people from Latin America, but not Palestine. And they all started screaming at me, and I'm still pretty emotional from that, and crying and being like, you're a traitor. How could you want people to stay in concentration camps just for your ideology? And so I'm really I really struggle with how so often people depoliticize the project of building community. And what happens is when we depoliticize it, then it's basically like unity means silencing the voices of trans people, of POC, of, people who are affected by US imperialism. So thanks for your presentation. And I think that from now on, when people scream at me, I'm gonna think of Otis Redding singing My Precious Love.
Ooh, what a great song. Thank you, Ala. Anyone else? Thank you all. Thank you.